Tonight, Dr. Kukeya had asked him during our last meeting to speak to us on the topic of clergy sexual misconduct. So that's sort of the general topic, but the title is Pastoral Leadership and Sexual Boundaries, Keeping Ministerial Relationships Healthy and Sacred. So he's going to talk specifically on pastoral leadership and sexual boundaries, keeping ministerial relationships healthy and sacred. Dr. Kukeya is the regional archdeacon for San Antonio and also the rector for Epiphany Anglican Church in San Antonio. So also he's the ethics director for the diocese. So he wears a bunch of those hats for the diocese. So we are very grateful to you, Dr. Kukeya, for preparing this talk and for delivering the talk. So at the end of your talk, we'll have some time for interaction. So asking questions and just interact with him for clarifications or additions of things that we think is important. So yeah, and Dr. Kukeya, I would also like you to hang back after this meeting with the meeting after the meeting. That would include also Venerable Don Armstrong. All right, so Dr. Kukeya, you have the floor. Please speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Can all of you hear me?
Yes, we hear you just fine.
Okay. Thank you, my Lord, and all the bishops and my fellow clergy for allowing me this evening to share with you a few things that are not necessarily unfamiliar to you, but it's always good that we remind ourselves of where we stand and how we can work together without actually turning into sexual predators for the people who are entrusted to us for pastoral care. And one of the things that I would like to start with, because some of you might not necessarily love my Congolese accent, and I don't want anyone to miss what I will be sharing. So I will be going through some PowerPoints that we can follow through what I have. So one thing I will ask is that if the host can allow me, give me permission to share my screen.
I just did.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sure that you can see the title that we have. At the beginning, what I have is actually, it's a story that I want us to read. And I want you to follow that story as I will be reading it, because it does really capture all the points that I might make during this presentation. So as you see that we'll talk about pastoral leadership and sexual boundaries. Basically how you and I and all other clergy can keep our relationships in a sense that is healthy and sacred. And you know, sacredness has to do with really something that is set apart for a specific purpose. And we, apparently, the titles that we carry tend to have that. If we see ministry as sacred, then our relationships within that ministerial work is also sacred. So we'll be going through this, and I want to start with, first of all, one thing that all of us need to understand, that sexual misconduct by church leader is really a topic that many people in the realm of clergy and church don't like to accept talking about. Because usually what happens, well, that's not me, that's other people. And there is this myth that goes with it. Usually when we hear about sexual misconduct, the first thing that most people have come to think of is the Catholic Church. They're the one who have actually pedophiles. These are the one who go do things. We don't do those things. But sexual misconduct really is more than really the stories that we get in the news or the stories that have been actually cast for Roman Catholics, because even ourselves, we are not immune to such behavior. And these are the things that I want us to be aware of as we continue through this year. Now, I want to make first a disclaimer before we start going. I want to emphasize that most of us, by far, really do engage in a sincere ministry. Okay? Most clergy do not engage in sexual misconduct. We do the work we can do, and we are honorable people. We do provide spiritual leadership to people who need us. I'm having someone who is trying to fight me at the same time. Okay, so what we need to understand before I go through this is that many clergy have really advanced education. Many of them are carefully screened through the process of going through the seminary or whatever process leads you to become an ordained minister. And your parishes engage really into that, or whatever committee it can be. Those who transfer have basically standing committees that look at them. However, there is still a segment of clergy that still do not engage into a real professional way in what they have to be doing. And this section is the one that I want to really emphasize on. That small portion is the one that will taint and really spoil the whole work for all ministers, and even those who are really good ones that will not engage into sexual misconduct. So it is necessary for all of us to know that this is something we need to be aware of. Before I go on, here are two passages that I want to read for all of us. And for some of you are real theologians, you might help me if I really misquote these. One of the things that sexual misconduct is something that is not accepted by any means through the scriptures, and God will not allow that. So the prophet Isaiah is uncompromising when he talks about things like that can refer to sexual misconduct. Here we have actually in Ezekiel 34, not Isaiah, it's Ezekiel 34, 1-6. And here we can read the word of the Lord came to me. Ah, you shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves. Should not shepherds feed the sheep? You have not strengthened the weak. You have not healed the sick. You have not bound up the injured. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. I, as I live, because my sheep has become a prey, and my sheep have become food for all the wild animals. I am against the shepherd, and I will demand my sheep at their hand and put a stop to their feeding the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouth, so that they may not be food for them. For thus says the Lord God, I myself will search for my sheep, and I will seek them out. This passage is actually echoed again in Matthew chapter 18, as Jesus is warning all of us when we mistreat the vulnerable. If any one of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it will be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea. Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you, in heaven, the angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. So you see that normally the disciples of Jesus are not to entrap anyone or take advantage of those who are less powerful. But what we need to do is that we need to be careful and we need to avoid hurtful behavior and even deprive ourselves of something rather than getting it at someone's expense. And that's what happened usually. And now we have the warning too, that for those who say that no one will ever find me out, now no one will find anything. Here is John telling us that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. And these passages will basically lead me to a story that I want to start. We got read it together. It's not really my story, This is a story that was compiled by people who did research, and they wrote, actually, this is the second edition of this book, Understanding Sexual Abuse by a Church Leader or Caregiver. The first edition was written by one person. The second actually was a contribution by different members. That's the story that comes in. This is actually a true story of someone who was interviewed, but the name has been changed. So here is the story where it starts. They asked me to tell them when it began. I don't know how to answer. Did it begin when he first kissed me, or when he told me I was beautiful and that no one had ever moved him as I did, or when we first had sex? It's not like when I dated my husband and we had a first date to refer back to. Perhaps it began when my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. When I heard the diagnosis, I felt my world collapse beneath me. I felt so alone and had no one to talk to. My husband was busy dealing with his own grief in his own fashion, working all the time and staying out of the house. We grew apart until we were simply two strangers sharing a bed. I turned to the only person I knew I could count on to comfort me, my pastor. He seemed a wonderful support. He listened without judging or giving advice. He spent hours just sitting with me in the hospital. I missed the comforting touch of a caring person. And so sometime he would simply hold me. I felt safe with him and came to depend on his support. My daughter's leukemia went to remission, and I rejoiced that I could return to what I thought was to be normal life. I became involved in church activities again. And since the pastor and I had established a rapport, he encouraged me to work with him on a number of projects. It seemed a way to both maintain the emotional connection we had established and to repay him for his kindness. The relationship seemed to become a mutual one as he began to share his concerns, needs, and hurts. He let me know that the reason he understood my marital difficulties was because he and his wife were also estranged. He couldn't let people know because it could affect his ministry, but he knew that I would understand. He gradually let me know that he needed me as much as I needed him. The question keeps haunting me. When did it become sexual abuse? Was it when he encouraged me to become dependent on him? When he began sharing his personal problems with me? When he told me that we had a special and secret relationship and that no one had ever understood him as I did? The first time I felt his erection when he hugged me, or when he hugged me in the hospital for the first time, our emotional intensity was so great, he said, that it wasn't right that we did not make the relationship complete as God intended. He said that while we were both married to other people in the eyes of man, in God's eyes, we were each other's spiritual and sexual partners. He left me feeling that there was no spiritual impediment to a sexual relationship. Once the sex began, the relationship seemed to change. We will work together, but he was much more furtive about arranging times with me. He barely spoke to me when others were around and warned me not to let anyone find out about our relationship. I was afraid and confused. I was afraid that people would find out and they would blame me for seducing a good man. I was afraid my husband would learn what has happened and leave me. I was confused because my pastor had said this was God ordained and then wrapped it up into secrecy. I thought I loved him, but I felt such shame at what was happening. I don't know when the abuse began, but I do know when it ended. Another woman from our church approached the deacons. My husband and I were deacons, and said that our pastor had been sexually involved with her for the last 4 years. I froze, terrified they would all find out about my relationship with him. My face flooded with shame as I joined the other in saying that we did not believe her. I thought it couldn't be true because I knew he loved me. When I confronted him, he denied her story. For some reason, I cut off the relationship anyway. If people treated her like that, how would they treat me for whom it is true? No, now that I think of it, I don't know when it ended. In fact, I don't think that it has. When I confronted him, the sexual contact ended, but it's not over. I left my church because I couldn't bear seeing him every week, pretending everyone was normal. I couldn't stand calmly by when I heard others say what a gentleman he was and how safe they felt with him. I'm still afraid that people will find out and condemn me. My husband and I have just started rebuilding our marriage. Disclosure could ruin everything. I read another article the other day about the importance of beginnings and endings. Maybe that's why I can't move on. My experience has no beginning and no end. I've been told that there can be an ending to my experience. I'm still trying to believe it. When our family moved to another city, I started attending a support group for parents of children with cancer. Through the group, I met a counselor whom I started seeing on a more regular basis. We had a rocky start until she asked me to tell her about relationships with previous caregivers. I broke down and, out of desperation, told her about my former pastor. She really surprised me. She told me how sorry she was that he had misused his power and taken advantage of my vulnerability. She explained to me that in legal terms, this was known as a breach of fiduciary duty and was a form of sexual abuse. Her words explained my confusion, my feelings of powerlessness, my shame, and my sense of betrayal. It's been hard for me to realize that it was his responsibility to uphold the boundaries of the relationship, and that if I hadn't been so vulnerable, I would never have considered a sexual relationship with him. I remembered the other woman who said he had been sexually involved with her. I started realizing that this was like a pattern. I wasn't his only victim. It seems so simple when I write it on paper. And yet, this whole process has involved months and months of intense pain. I have cried for hours on end, missed days of work, and spent a lot of time feeling scared to leave the house. But I'm starting to see the other side. Last week, when I was playing with my daughter, I laughed for the first time in months. My journey back to faith has been slow. My pastor had represented God to me. How could I trust in God when this man, or God, had abused me in God's name. But slowly, I'm coming to realize that God did not condone my pastor's actions, nor does God condemn me for being seduced by him. Gradually, through friends at my new church who modeled integrity and compassion, I am coming to believe in a God who can handle my anger and my doubts, a God who hates injustice. I've been thinking about others who were hurt by this man, and I am wondering if there is any way to prevent it from happening again. I may lodge an official complaint with our denomination. My counselor has suggested that I find an advocate or support person who could walk with me through this process, helping me decide what I need to do, offering support and assisting me in negotiating the conference structures. Hopefully, lodging the complaint, we let others know this man isn't trustworthy, protect them from being hurt, and hold him accountable. That's where the story ends. But here, some verses from Psalm 22, 20, and also 55 that capture her feelings. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Truly, I would flee far away. I would lodge in the wilderness. I would hurry to find a shelter for myself from the raging wind of the tempest. It is not enemies who taunt me. I could bear that. It is not adversaries who deal insolently with me. I could hide from them. But it is you, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend, with whom I kept pleasant company. We walked in the house of God with the thumb. My companion laid hands on a friend and violated a covenant with me, with speech smoother than butter, but with a heart set on war, with words that were softer than oil, that in fact were drawn swords. These passages really are telling the issue that we have. It has to do with sexual misconduct in church and in society at large. And this is very troubling, not only for our communities here in the United States, but also throughout the world. Everyone is troubled by this because of the few individuals that have basically become predators. So this unwanted behavior does two things though. It does damage the moral environment where you and I and many ministers around the world basically work, but also where people come as we minister to them. They come to worship, they come to seek for some comfort, and they want to learn from all of us. And yet, they find out what happens. So sexual misconduct, especially in the hands of the clergy, does happen in what we call a ministerial relationship. This is a relationship that is established when a person who is basically coming to us in our capacity of church officials or church leaders, that we come and we interact with these people to provide pastoral care, not anything else. And this can include the bishops, it includes the priests, it includes deacons, it includes anyone, even just camp ministers. Those people who hold responsibility within a church. they enter into a ministerial relationship. So how does sexual misconduct really happen? The sexual misconduct is normally a general term that we all use that can include basically violation of boundaries, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and sexual exploitation. At Baylor University, there's a group that continues to do research on sexual misconduct. And this is what they said, that misconduct of a sexual nature within a ministerial relationship occurs when a person in a ministerial role fails to maintain appropriate professional boundaries with those whom we serve. We fail to maintain professional boundaries with those whom we serve. So where there is trust, there is the potential of betrayal of that trust. And when a person in ministerial role violates professional boundaries, this betrayal of trust may become a powerful weapon of abuse, like in the case of Sharon, how she was basically abused. So what do we call sexual harassment? Basically, I've used one that is not necessarily limited to church, but the EEOC says that sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of sexual nature in the workplace or learning environment. And church is that. At church, people work there. At church, people come to learn. They won't learn about God. They won't learn about Christ. They won't learn about salvation. They won't learn about grace. And all those things. When we betray our boundaries, we violate all those. But yet you can see also that there can be sexual exploitation. The World Health Organization defines that as actual or attempted. It doesn't have to be happening. An actual or an attempted abuse of position of vulnerability, power, or trust for sexual purposes, including but not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from the sexual exploitation of another. So in a church, sexual contact between the church leader and the person who is seeking care from us would be considered sexual conduct, sexual misconduct, which violates actually a trust relationship. But we have also what we call sexual abuse. This is the actual or threatened physical intrusion of a sexual nature, whether by force or under unequal or coercive conditions. That second part will be what will be important to us, because sometimes we'll hear that, well, this was under mutual consent. I tell you why there is no consent there, even if you perceive it to be a mutual consent. So when we talk about sexual exploitation or sexual abuse, it can be physical contact or it can be verbal in nature. So how can we tell basically why people engage into some sexual misconduct? I can tell you two things that usually happen. We as clergy, sometime from a psychological egoism perspective, we tend to feel this need of being liked. We tend to have lowered our own level of acceptance that we want people to like us. We want to be the good one. And so, and we seek affirmation as we hear people coming and talk to us. And that can be very problematic if you want to be flattered by the people that you serve. But the other thing also is that this position of leadership that we find ourselves into, and people are attracted to people in leadership. You might feel that you don't have that in you. You have a position that is powerful by virtue of being a clergy. And there are many people who want to come and want to be there, and they like that. And you might feel that as they're approaching you, that this is the time, and you start engaging into behaviors that you might not realize that is becoming already far beyond the boundaries under which you should be serving. So when we look at anything and you engage into such thing, There is no way in this world where a clergy can justify really sexual misconduct. If you were not aware of it, then a good search for repentance can be helpful, but trying to justify the wrong does not make it right. So what is the problem with ministerial sexual misconduct? First of all, many people say, well, I only had an affair, or it was a fall, it was a mistake, or it's an indiscretion, it's a lapse in moral judgment. Well, forget all those. It is not. Clergy misconduct is a violation of professional ethics. It is a violation of personal boundaries. It is a violation of trust and power. So all this second part that you can use as an excuse does not fly. There's no affair because, first of all, you don't have equal power. It's not a fall because you should have known basically how to set your boundaries when you were being tempted. It's not a mistake. This is how actually you become more conscientious that you're not moving with the flow. Yeah, lapse in moral judgment, it's not. Okay? Misconduct by a church leader is really a violation of professional ethics and a serious misuse of the power of the pastor/teacher role. The trauma on the victim does not stay only with one aspect of their life. If you may recall, really, the story of Sharon that we started with, it has touched all her aspects of her life, no matter where she can be. Work, the relationship with others, relationship with church. So clergy misconduct is also an injustice toward another person, and it violates those personal boundaries. At the same time, it does violate not only the person, but the entire religious community where we actually have to work, because really a sacred trust has been broken and the whole congregation has been betrayed. We have seen actually one time here in San Antonio, I was invited to go to one of the Baptist church by some friends because they were having an event. And the same day I attended that service, the preacher stood up in there and said at the end, after he gave his sermon, and he asked people, he said that I need to apologize to all of you. And I have an announcement to make that I have basically fathered a child with someone in this congregation. And I have decided to file for divorce with my wife. And this man was asking for forgiveness from his congregation after first going with his sermon. And that's the whole congregation that was betrayed. The trust that was in this man was gone. So victims of betrayal and emotional abuse may look to the faith community base for support. They will come to us. They will go to someone they trust. But when people come at the moment of crisis, they are very vulnerable and they trust us with that. Betraying them is worse. So when we engage in inappropriate behavior toward our congregants, sacred trust is shattered. And the victims are left confused, devastated, and often ashamed. And you heard that in that story of Sharon. How she was confused, how she was devastated. And the issue of shame kept coming back. So victims feel deep shame. Or some of them have gone and condemned themselves when they had nothing to be condemned for. They may fear not being believed, and you heard that actually in the story of Sharon, that she says that people might not believe me. She even doubted the woman who came and saying that this pastor has been involved with me for 4 years. And you would think that she would be the first one to believe that, but she even doubted that woman. So the fear of being blamed by church official or members. They can experience a crisis of faith and even leave the church altogether. Sharon tried that. She left that church, and she said that her way coming back to faith has been slow, even though she found another church with other people who are encouraging her. So how can you tell what patterns of behavior that are here? Here I put them just as bullets. I will share these PowerPoints with you. You can actually use them. First of all, what happened is that the perpetrator grooms the victim. You know, this idea of grooming, usually that's how it starts. You have to be there and making sure that the scene is right, and you want to gain trust from the other people, and then slowly you can come in there. So you groom them, making them feel important and valued. No one has ever made me feel this way. See? The perpetrator encourages dependence on him. So the victim feels they need this person's help and support. That minister who was there every night, every day, sitting by the bedside and holding this woman's hand in silence, saying nothing. The perpetrator then convinces the victim that they need the victim. They may say that no one else understands the stress I'm under. You heard that from that pastor. No one understands me. I understood you better because that I'm going through the same experience. That sharing of your personal information with a congregant. Or they may violate confidentiality. They will start telling you about some other people they have counseled in the parish. You know, telling the victim's problem when it should not. You're violating that minister, the congregant trust that they have come to, that privilege that they give you to hear what they have. So then what happens? Gradually, the abusive person introduces sexualized behavior in a way that the victim may interpret as appropriate, such as ending each counseling session with a hug, gradually increasing the intensity of that hug. And then in the end, the perpetrator engages in more blatantly abusive behavior with the victim. See that grooming? So you heard basically like the man who said that in the eyes of the people, we are married to other people, but we are by God's design sexual partners. We start doing this, and poor Sharon, no wonder she was confused. You've spoken about difficulty in sexual relationship. Sex is best experienced in an open, trusting relationship. Since we have worked hard at developing such a relationship here, this is likely the best place to work on improving your ability to respond sexually. In the real world, that's what they call players. They know how to put the right words to lure someone. I can teach you to love your husband more fully, to be the wife Christ intended you to be. Why don't you do that with your wife? How are you so unhappy with your wife, and then you think that you have the skill to teach someone else's wife or someone else in your congregation? So by the time the abuse becomes apparent, the victim believes that they need the pastor and that the pastor's well-being depends on keeping silent. So these are things that can be troubling. So sometimes you tell other people that if you try to go tell others, I will tell you that no one will believe you. The other woman was not believed. Even Sharon, who knew that this was really true, she did not believe the other woman. See? So what happened is that when we engage into any type of sexual misconduct, it becomes abusive and it is inappropriate. One, because we are misusing our power and authority for leading a congregation. We are there to meet people's needs. We are there to counsel them in a way that they feel cared for, not for us to exploit them because of the position of power and authority. You see, the power we have comes only with the authority that is given to us by the people who trust us. But yet, the second thing is that it is wrong because we feel that people are vulnerable. They tell us about themselves. They open their hearts to us with all the issues they have. And yet, we exploit those so that we take advantage of them. And that's breach of trust. So what happened is that we also have a problem because when people come, and many of the people who have done this, they say, what? This was consensual. There was really, this is an adult and two adults really agreed to this. No, there is no consent in there. A meaningful consent is given when people have equal powers. In the ministerial relationship, there is no equal power. The people who come to you, they might be the president of the country. When they come to you for spiritual matter, you have more authority than them. You have more power. And so abusing that power, you can find that there's no consent. It's not equal. There is no mutuality, as people can say. There is no actually consent. So this is what I was talking about, even in those moments when a parishioner may appear to initiate an inappropriate relationship. Well, you need to know that you're the one to establish the boundaries. Remind them that I am your pastor. I'm not here for me to try to entertain you. And it has to be clearly stated. And we have an issue, if you're coming to me, it's that I need to guide you, not for me to get involved with you in any way other than counseling you. And the problem is that if that person really needs serious counseling, know your limitation. You are not a professional counselor. You deal with the crisis intervention and refer them to those who actually went to school for just helping people. The idea of saying that the Lord will enlighten me so I can get all the wisdom I need. Well, the Lord has enlightened also these other people who went to get those degrees. Send them to them. Lord, give me the wisdom so that I can know how to lead your people. And that's one of the things that we have to know. We need to set our own appropriate boundaries. So two ways of dealing with things. If we do not understand this idea of power, we will be lost completely. So the Webster Dictionary basically tells us that power is a possession of control, authority, or influence over others, the ability to act or produce an effect. So most of us do have some type of power, sometimes because of our class, because of our education, because of the knowledge or information or the position that we have. Some of us because of the sense of creativity that we can have. It's you because of your personal charisma. People will feel attracted to you. Because of your physical size. Because of the role that you play in the church. So giving that is that all of us with our own idea of power, we make change within the lives we have and the lives of society. But we have to see that power have to be understood in two ways. So this Mary Kate Morse explained that power is less like a tool we use to make something happen and more like the water we drink to stay alive. Personal power is essential. It means knowing that I am an individual and can make decisions about my life. Personal power is key to emotional health and well-being. So we recognize that we have that. And when we feel that we have no power, we feel inadequate, out of control and lost. But we need to know that power can be creative, but it can be destructive. Richard Foster speaks of creative power in these terms. The power that creates, gives life and joy and peace. It is freedom and not bondage, life, not death, transformation and not coercion. The power that creates, restores relationship, and gives the gift of wholeness to all. But we have also Sarah Michels, who basically comes and says that we need to learn a new way of understanding power. When we understand power, not in terms of domination, but in terms of mobilizing resources, realizing creativity, and enabling community, then real transformation can occur. And I think what people come to us is exactly that. That we as ministers, as clergy, if we use the power in a mobilizing way of getting resources for the people who are hurting, basically being creative, enabling them, understanding that they come so they can be transformed, so they can be restored, we cannot inflict harm and pain in them. So when power is used creatively, it restores relationships. It liberates those who are oppressed. It brings inner and outer healing. It nurtures confidence. It enhances communication, and it inspires faith. In the case of Sharon, when she found a community that gave her that, she started going back to church. She started trusting again. But we have also what is the destructive power. It's basically power that is not healthy. It's not power. That one is used to hurt. And that's what people who engage into this idea of sexual misconduct use. Now, let's see if I want to see that. These are things that I already talked about. Now, can a person in a position of trust or leadership ever be romantically involved with a congregant, a student, or a counselee who comes to you? The answer is no. If you want to be involved with those people, hopefully you will first leave your position, leave that church, and go somewhere else. As long as you are part of that congregation, do not do it. You have an equal relationship. It can turn into a problem for your congregation and anyone else. So if you are looking, a clergy who are seeking a romantic relationship can do so outside of their own congregation. If really that passage where we read that the man and the woman, that the woman would leave, the man will leave his parents' house and go cling to his wife, but hopefully that one is not your congregation. And leave your congregation and go cling to someone else outside of the congregation that we lead. So that's a no. There is no way to explain it. So if you questioning that, here are some questions that you can ask. Was the ministerial relationship minimal in nature? Was it involving any counseling at all? Is the religious leader willing to remove himself from the ministerial relationship? Is a religious leader willing to be open about the relationship with the congregation? And then they might even advise you what might happen if you have a vestry or other people who pray for you every day. Now, when we look at anything and you get involved with someone, and in the end, you say that they were the one who seduced you, no one will listen to you generally, because you are responsible for monitoring your own boundaries. You cannot shift the blame on the parishioner. You are the one who has the power. You are the one who have the authority. You have the upper hand. You need to basically make sure that you are controlling your own boundaries. And if someone is tempting you, you need to set those boundaries clear. So what can lead to boundary violations? It's basically when you start and you feel that you're doing something that is harmless. Many boundary violations go unrecognized. Most begin in innocent situations that feel good to the parishioner and to the clergy. Usually violations are not felt until really something That's not false. It should be goes. Don't check on false. It's something goes wrong. That's when really it starts. You might be feeling great, and that's the nature of any affair anyway. You feeling good until something goes wrong and people start thinking. So victims of violations may resist seeing the wounds that they are inflicting to others, and they become disgruntled. And if church leadership have talked to them, they become the problem instead of seeing that they are the problem. So here are some warning signs for ourselves. Start to feel more like a friend than a pastor. If you are in such a relationship that someone is coming at you yourself, you feel that this person has become more of a friend. Well, that's a warning sign. Spending more time with certain members because of the emotional return it gives you. The conversation becomes increasingly personal. As the minister talks unduly about himself, like that man who started talking about his wife and his relationships. Hopefully you can find a good friend who is a minister that you can be talking to. The minister's physical contact has moved beyond greetings to inappropriate touching and hugs. Those prolonged hugs. Oh, my sister, this feels so good. It's good to see you. Well, hug them and move. But don't be holding someone forever. The minister fantasizes about a sexual relationship with the congregant. The minister arranges meeting with the congregant outside of the normal counseling time. The minister increasingly hides his feeling for and basically meetings with the parishioners from his accountability system, especially the minister's spouse or church groups. When you start doing that, you have gone too far already. Your church should know who you're meeting with. They should know your calendar. Hopefully someone else keeps that calendar. Your wife especially should know that. You're not telling them about the stories that you're having in counseling, but your wife should know that you're counseling someone at church. If you start hiding that, you need to ask yourself why you're doing it. So what could be done? Most people and all of us in ministry, we have heard this usually. They tell us, what do we as clergy need to do to protect ourselves from women who will falsely accuse us of misconduct? This is the question that is the wrong question. It is not helpful because this question by itself is telling us you're not at fault. They're falsely accusing you. So you might not realize that you are the problem, or you can become the problem. So the question needs to be changed to, what do we as clergy need to do to make ourselves healthier and more aware of our responsibilities to maintain appropriate boundaries so that we don't abuse women who come to us for care? See, that's a different question. Rather than saying I'm an innocent guy and these people will really come and falsely accuse me, so what do I need to do? No, you need to be aware that you can become one of those predators. So instead of saying how I protect me, no, how do I find healthy relationships so that in my responsibilities, I will create boundaries that are appropriate, that I do not turn into an abuser of the people who I'm supposed to shepherd. And when we can ask that question, we can become self-aware of what we need to do. Be honest with yourself. Stay strong in your relationship with God. Pray with your wife. Pray with your children. We should not be arrogant, but we need to be knowing that we are fragile. We are a broken tool in God's toolbox. And if we can know that and calling for God to help us, then we will find many ways. Have a close friends with whom you can be honest and ask for help or support. When I say here close friend, that's not your congregant. Remember, there is an imbalance of power when you go to people from your congregation. Okay. So you need to find a fellow minister, a clergy who can share with you anytime. Be part of a structured group of colleagues that meet on a regular basis. This is something that normally should be happening in our archdeaconries, that we set continual meetings with our friends, that you pray and then you share about what's going on. If you feel distressed, seek out a therapist. You are not your own therapist. Your wife, unless she does have that, but even your wife also, I think she will send you to someone else. Develop and maintain friendship and interest outside of your ministry setting. Don't go to a bar though. That's not where you want to find, if you go there, go with your friends who are part of your ministry. Pay attention to where and how you meet people for counseling sessions. Structure meetings so you are not completely alone with the person. This is something that they always tell us. So set clear physical, psychological, and emotional boundaries to enable the trust that is a foundation of our ministry. So these are things that we need to do. Know your limitation as a pastor, and you a pastoral counselor. You are not a professional counselor. You can identify crisis intervention, but send them to those who know how to deal and how they can help these people. Set limits on the number of the sessions that you will see those people. Don't keep them eternally. Remember that you are called to a servant ministry. You are the pastor of a congregation, not to find friends or make your marks. You are called to meet the needs of others for the sake of the gospel. When I was with Roman Catholic, some guy did actually make a comment that he says, yeah, I know that God did say, feed my flock. He did not say, and he used actually the F word. God say, feed my flock. He didn't say F my flock. And that's what happens. We abuse people, we hurt them, and the consequences are really so bad. Try to not spend long hours discussing church work at the office and have limited time for intimacy at home. I want to insist on this. Do not find happiness away from your wife. Do not find happiness away from your family. If you have issues, seek counseling with your wife. You marry that woman because that's the one you said she's the most beautiful. Otherwise, you would not have married them unless you're a player. Seek intimacy at home. This idea of spending more time away from home in the name of ministry, it is basically a messed up concept. When you have emotional intimacy with your spouse and with your children and you pray with them, I think that thing of do not lead me into temptation will work. So cultivate healthy relationship at home that allow for all the doors of intimacy to be open. Invest at home first and foremost, so you can strengthen for dealing with others. If you don't have that and you have troubles at your house, you will be in trouble too anywhere. If your marriage is unhappy, get help and get it now. Don't wait. Seek counseling in another town if necessary. Your marriage is for life and it comes before your ministry. If your marriage falters, your ministry will crash as well. So avoid sharing your personal issues about your spouse with other people. It's a red flag for your marriage, a sign that emotional investments are being made in the wrong place. In the end, find a mentor or a counselor. Find a spiritual director. Father Rob Goodman can tell you. He can guide you if you don't want to talk to him. He can give you a list of other people you can go see. So let's see if I want to look at this. When you are in doubt, I want to emphasize that. Persons in ministerial roles should ask themselves whose needs are being met in this relationship. If the answer is your needs, then you are in the wrong path. The relationship should be built to a point that you only there to help everyone else, not yourself. Be aware that your position carries power. Your authority and power will be challenged and tempted, and also see yourself as an agent of safety and healing, not as an abuser. Be careful with your social media use, because really that's one of those problems that people are having. So I want to stop here, and I want to see if we have any questions, comments that I can answer, or other people here who have as well so much expertise can also comment on it.